Hi, I'm Franco Luna PumaPodcast. You're listening to Teka Teka Explains. In today's episode,
Okay, we just got off the car here in San Pablo, Laguna. I'm standing in front of the Komikero Komiks Museum. It's pretty clear it's fashioned out of a bungalow. Pretty quaint. The front door has a poster of a comic panel. The Komikero Komiks Museum, isang kwento ni Jerry Alangilan. Of course, in the design of a comic panel.
we take you on an audio tour of the Komikero Komiks Museum. It just reopened its doors in September after pandemic restrictions forced its closure in March 2020. On November 12, the Teka Teka news team, composed of PumaPodcast CEO and comic book writer Carl Javier, Teka Teka executive producer Kat Ventura, audio editor Presh Capistrano, and myself, drove to San Pablo, Laguna to visit one of the most comprehensive collections of Philippine comic book history.
So it's one room. It's part of a gallery inside the house. The gracious owners of this house provided the space for Jerry and his wife to share their collection. So we've entered the room. It's a white blank wall filled with panels.
That was Kat Ventura. And here's Eileen Florese Alangilan. She's the daughter of Rudy Florese, whom Pinoy comics fans consider as one of the best illustrators of his time.
Kasi maraming spaces, gusto talaga namin punuin siya. Kasi that's what Jerry wanted, na gusto niya punong-puno. As in, punong-puno. Mahihilo ka sa dami, parang ganun.
Eileen is also the curator of the Komikero Museum, which she built with her husband, Doroteo Gerardo Alangilan Jr.
Let's walk to the other side of the room next to the door on the left. We did stop here at length and we asked about... There's a shelf here with a lot of comic titles. Ma'am Eileen told us that a lot of these were lent to the museum by Comiket because the idea really here was to put up a comic nook where visitors of the museum are allowed to really pick up titles and read as long as they want. She said that was really part of the vision of Jerry in putting up the museum, which was really to share the joy of comic books with younger people.
Jerry Alangilan, or Sir Jerry as he's fondly called, is a comic book writer, artist, and publisher. He's an architect by profession, but he prefers to be called a storyteller through the creation of comic books. His extensive portfolio includes Wasted, Timawa, Lastic Man, Crest Hut Butt Shop, Johnny Balbona, Humanus Rex, Where Bold Stars Goats Die, and Rodsky Patotsky, Ang Dalagang Baby. It's safe to say he's considered a rock star in the comic book community after having been nominated Comic Watch Inker of the Year in 2018 and for winning the Best Asian Comic Book Award of France's Prix ACBD in 2011 for his comic book Elmer, a story about sentient chickens. Not to mention, he was also nominated for the Will Eisner Comic Industry Award, which is considered the Oscars of the comic book industry. But non-comic book fans might know Jerry better by his Hey Baby face that went viral on YouTube. Our team was actually surprised to find stickers of the meme at random spots around the museum, placed by Jerry himself. Jerry loved comics, and in 2016 he put up the Komikero Komiks Museum in San Pablo, Laguna to promote and preserve the artwork created by past illustrators.
1998 pa lang nung first ko na siyang na-meet, na he was already talking about it bits and pieces eh.
Pero nag-start siyang bumili, nung nag-start siyang ma-frustrate na nobody knew kung sino sila Kaching, sino Alcala, walang may kilala. Hindi alam na meron pa na tayong, I think I remember, It was during that time na yung mga first bids ng mga coaching para maging national artist siya. Yung exhibit sa CCP. Yun yung time na yun. Around that time siya nag-start mag-collect. Kasi yung purpose niya talaga noon pa lang, mag-collect and then magkaroon ng museum. Kasi he wanted people to know kung sino tong
She's referring to Francisco Coching, a Filipino comic book illustrator and writer regarded as one of the pillars of the Philippine comics industry. Coching is referred to as the King of Comics and as the Dean of Philippine Comics. Jerry's wife and friends say the museum was more than just a place to share his extensive collection.
Over time, nung nag-dwindle yung industry, and of course, yung mga newsstands, medyo nagsisimula mawala na, kids don't sort of see anymore yung the heroes that went before. Of course, there's so much more stories that we missed out on. And it's not just superhero comics, but I particularly like yung mga horror natin, yung at a certain point, yung mga bomba comics, which also has cultural significance because it's a time capsule. Ang ni Jerry is that through this museum, the online museum, in his way na sort of introduce or rather reintroduce yung work of our old masters to a new generation.
That's Jonas Diego, a frequent collaborator of the museum and one of Jerry's close friends who also joined us that day.
What you're seeing now actually is the bigger room. Kung makikita nyo tong much smaller room before, nandito yung original first iteration ng museum. So, it was much smaller. Tapos yung sa labas, it was a restaurant actually. I remember nung first time binuksan doon, had steak, we had great coffee doon sa ano. And then, of course, nung nangyari yung pandemic, everything closed down. But thankfully, sina Architect Barte, it seems that parang they insisted na hindi let's do something, let's make it bigger na so yung dapat plano na ililipat na, so parang sige dito na lang muna, and then all this bigger space with the lights, with it wala kang ganyan lights before. We actually got in touch with some of the older masters, yung mga descendants nina Coching, nina Alcala. And then we got through our mutual friend, si Jay Ignacio, who did a project with Alex Nino na pwede ba kaming maka-request ng high-res scans or images ng nila purely for display sa museum. And as you can see, yung Voltar is here, and some of the high-res versions from Jay Ignacio himself, yung Alandal, yung kanilang bagong graphic novel ni Alex Nino.
Jonas said part of the museum was arranged according to the eras they came from. And though it was all in one room, the museum felt like a living, breathing piece of Philippine history from one end to the other.
You can really see the progression in terms of the art style, then versus now. These copies under the hard glass are all aged, they're all torn and frayed at the edges. Some of the dates are as far back as 1959, 1950.
They're like printouts, I guess. Printouts of comic book covers.
I very distinctly remember them describing these printouts as being from before the age of Photoshop. And the level of detail is really different on this one. You can tell everything was drawn and colored by hand, which is really remarkable to think about. And
Yeah, don't you think it gives it a certain charm that we don't really get anymore with digital art?
absolutely.
It was a mix of prints from the past and present. It had the original art of Sulyap sa Buhay ni Kengkoy, all full 5 pages from the comic book from the 60s. Here's Kat Ventura.
So, Sulyap sa Buhay ni Kengkoy, written by Tony Velasquez, illustrated by Rudy Florese, yung tatay ni Ma'am Eileen na kausap natin. This is a 1966 print. The original print, might I add. Makikita mo nga dito yung age, yung acid, pati yung artistry of it all. Wala pang digital at this time, and honestly ako, I'm just awed by it. So it says here, the story as a whole presents culturally inappropriate depictions of blacks and Chinese, which were typical of the era. We have page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Siguro yung size niya, if you can sort of imagine, isang A4 piece of paper na naka-horizontal. And makikita mo nga naman dito, if any of you are familiar with blackface, that's exactly what we see here. May isang word na sinabi si Ma'am Eileen eh. And actually, yung sabi niya sa akin, ito yung tawag na sa Chinese nun. And tinuro niya. Ito yung word. Nababasa mo ba?
Ganito yun, padre. Nakaipon na si Rosing na kinikita niya kay Beho.
And much like the gutters in between panels that make comic books what they are, the framed sepia pages of Sulyap sa bahay ni Kenkoy were at the center of the room, facing the door. It's the first thing you see when entering the museum.
From afar, you could tell it was blackface, and even like the facial features, they look quite flamboyant, the drawing style. And I guess the messaging there is very, very deliberate, even in the art style. If we're talking about racism, particularly racism in the Philippines, it's very telling of how Filipinos look at other races, even here, even in Asia.
The title card accompanying the exhibit read, "This is part of our history which we should not close our eyes upon," to give us a perspective of how much more enlightened we are today, and perhaps allow us to be much more enlightened in the future. This is how Jonas and Eileen described that piece to us. They say it was important to be honest about where the community went with its art through the years.
If you have this, I call it pagka-tone deaf nila nung araw. It's not just giving you layers eh. At least we're showing it. Kasi ayaw namin na i-filter, ayaw namin i-censor na ito part ng history natin. Ayaw namin maging hipokrito na, these things didn't happen.
Para nire-revise ang history.
Oo, nire-revise ang history. It happened. Na whether we like it or not, these are yung spotty things about our past na, if we learn from it, then good. And if we're showing this and you're still doing it now, yung problema ka.
Oftentimes kasi people sort of judge the past with the lens of the present. I'm not saying that some of those things are correct or but you have to sort of put it into context. And these stories, our old masters, even the bad comics, at certain point, sikat ang bomba comics. It sort of gives you insight. Ano ba yung nangyayari nung time na yon? Kasi ganito, so this is how they reacted. Sa storytelling culture, yung makeup ng ating personality, our identity, is enriched by knowing your history. For example, when we were colonized by Spain, it brought a lot of bad things, but it also brought in a lot of developments sa natin. Like it or hate it, it's part of who you are, and it sort of gives you dimension. Similar to wine or coffee.
There were also copies of the comic book El Indio, which were illustrated by the first national artist for comics, Francisco Coching. The El Indio collection, published by the Vidal Foundation in 2009, was digitally restored by Sir Jerry and Zara Macandili. He says in his Komikero blog that the whole process took them 4 years. The museum also had prints of Swapang by Deo Gonzalez and Alfredo Alcala, Superior by Nestor Redondo, as well as copies of Jerry's contemporary works like Bakokak with Kevin Ray Valentino, Rodsky Patotsky Ang Dalagang Baby with Arnold Are.
Sigurado ka, Rodsky?
Aba, hindi Hindi totoo yan. Hoy bata, ilang taon ka na ba? Paano?
Mr. Season, kapag sinabi ng anak ko na scam ito.
Bakit kayo maniniwala dyan? Bata lang yan. Anong alam yan? At saka, teka muna. Halos sanggol lang yan Bakit?
Labas! Rodsky, paano mo alam na scam yun?
Dad, it's so obvious. Duh. Any simpleton can see it.
Abay, oo nga naman. Simple tunes? Ano yun?
It didn't take a comics enthusiast to see that the scenes of each and every cover, both in content and style, was distinctly Filipino. Some were of Bathala, others referred to Filipinos as Indio. The cover of Timawa, for example, was a comic book version of the railway station in Blumentritt, Manila. In one shot, Alanggilan captured the angst and the circumstances of Filipinos from way back when.
He worked hard to really recreate yung kanyang kinunan ng picture. Umakyat siya sa LRT, tapos kinunan niya ng picture yung Blumentritt. Ni-recreate niya dyan sa ano. It's almost the same thing. Kung makikita mo yung pictures, it's almost the same thing.
A museum themed around original Filipino-made comic books is certainly a unique idea, and the group behind it says it was their labor of love for the comics community.
Think about it this way. Oftentimes, we would be amazed na parang, oh wow, ang galing nung Japanese manga, anime. Nowadays, it's Korean novelas and other, na parang we're all seeking inspiration, from outside. But ang dami actually from Americans na collectors na mga ganito, na parang ang rich ng history ng mga hindi nakikita ng bagong generation. Yung generation kasi namin, pag lalabas kami ng bahay, may nakasampay na comics sa kapitbahay which you can rent for 5 pesos. O kaya, our moms would buy us comics. So, it was freely available in newsstands. And we knew yung si Panday.
And though there's a lot to say about where the industry stands today, there is also clear progress in the art it's creating for anyone paying attention. Listen to what Jason Torres had to say about the future of comics in the Philippines. He's another frequent collaborator of the Komiks Museum.
I think over the years, yung mga misunderstanding ay unti-unti nang nawawala eh.
Yes.
It used to be na pag sinabing comics, yun yung 5 pesos na 8 pages each ang kwento, na yung kwento niya ay hindi tataas sa standard genre ng action, horror, fantasy, drama. Ngayon wala nang ganun. I'd see a story that's about 2 gay guys and one of them is a manananggal. Meron. Napaka-diverse na nung niya eh. Yun kasi dati yung misconception about comics na nasa isang kahon lang siya. Ang isa rin yung dapat superhero comics lang.
Sadly, Jerry passed away on December 21, 2019 at the age of 51. And in March 2020, the Komikero Komiks Museum was forced to close up shop because of the COVID-19 pandemic. After 2 years, Komikero is finally taking in visitors again by appointment and only in groups of 5 as a precaution during the pandemic. If you're interested in visiting the Komikero Komiks Museum, it's open from Wednesdays to Sundays from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. Message its official Facebook page, Komikero Komiks Museum, to make your appointment. We'll leave you with Jerry and Eileen with the final word.
You have to have comics in your veins and in your blood and in your entire body, in your every waking hour, even in your dreams. When I was trying to break in, I was dreaming of being in comics all the time. That is how much I wanted it. That being said, no matter what people tell you you can't do it, if people tell you can do it, it doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter what people say to dissuade you or even encourage you. If it is in you to want to become a comic book artist or comic book writer, you will find ways to become one.
Talagang love niya comics. Tinanggap ko na yun. First love niya talaga comics. So, whether history niya, whether yung pinag-uusapan nga namin kanina na meron pang mga bata na gumagawa, he was very happy about that. Pang gusto niya talaga mag-expand, mag-grow, na hanggang darating yung araw na dyan, na merong mga tao pa rin na continuously working on it, na yun, tontuwa siya doon. Hindi siya, para sa kanya, you don't discourage these young people to create. Kasi sila yung mag-uphold later on, di ba?
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka Explains. Again, I'm Franco Luna. This episode was written by myself and Kat Ventura. It was edited by Presh Capistrano and produced also by Kat Ventura. We want to offer a very special thanks to Eileen Flores Alangilan, Jonas Diego, Jason Torres, and Carl Javier. If you liked this episode, share it with a friend or two. And of course, don't forget to follow Teka Teka and PumaPodcast wherever you listen. At para sa mga mahilig manood sa YouTube, PumaPodcast na rin po kami doon. Just search PumaPodcast and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for listening.